What's up, RotoGrinders? Welcome back to the Morning Grind. Once again, I'm Dean. Stevie is not with you today. He's still busting out his NASCAR content. Of course, if you guys want to get a taste of that, you know where to hit him up here on RotoGrinders.com. That said, we are going to give you some content today. We're talking about specifically MMA, UFC, and who's our MMA UFC guy? It is Artivore, SunTszu Joe, 8th ranked grinder, MMA specific, currently in the RG rankings. What's going on, Joe?
Well, I am not $1 million richer, nor am I 1/3 of the top prize richer, as there were 3 winners. But other than that, it's hard for me to complain.
Yeah, last week was the first ever MMA UFC Millionaire Maker on DK. 2.5 million total prize pool, 1 million up top. And we were talking about this pre-show, just 3 people, which is kind of sort of somewhat surprising. Obviously, it dictates based upon results, but just 3 people split it.
Shocked me. Totally
none
shocked
of our friends.
Me. Yes, none of our immediate friends. I did talk to one of the winners after, and I do a little show with Brett Apley called Creating Alpha, and one of the winners is going to appear with us on that show, which is kind
Nice.
of something to look forward to if you want to know, what to do with life-changing money, which 391,000 and change most certainly is. Tune into that. But I mean, it was interesting. I would have been surprised, and I know you took a survey, Dean, if you told me that a Nunes lineup would have resulted in such a small split, which is what happened. Nunes scored a lot of points in that fight, and it took pretty much every single one of those points for her to appear on the optimal, or what we refer to as the nuts lineup. And I was really surprised that there was only 3 winners, but there was somewhat of a perfect storm. I mean, a high ownership guy and big favorite named Chase Hooper, who was flawed and who I was underexposed to, ended up losing to Alex
Caceres. Is he like 12? How old is Chase Hooper?
Yeah, he looks really young.
Watching...
He's 20. He's actually 20. So, he ended up, kind of being on the optimal. And then you've had a couple of other guys that surprised, like Charles Bird had some ownership, and he lost to Coconut Bombs. I know you love nicknames, Coconut Bombs. He lost to him. He had a cardio dump and immediately retired after he lost that fight. So there was a few surprises, and that is what caused the split, the 3-way split only.
Yeah, and they didn't completely sell it out, DK, but they didn't take a loss either. And people, there was overlay, but not as much overlay. You didn't pay the full, whatever, 15, 16, 17% of what you showed their raking. And then I saw some people on Twitter speculating if this was a better fight, a better card, maybe they would have sold it out. Do you think DK does this again? Was it a success for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, everybody was saying DK. If it was the Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson card, they might have sold out. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because, and we were also discussing this prior. We got to save some of our better stuff for online, but we all know that they had a lot of satellites that they offered for this contest through a lot of sports, and the way that the satellites are set up, they actually make more money than if you were to actually buy in a seat on the number of entries that it takes to win a satellite. So I don't know. Like, I think they made money on the deal. Like to your point, Dean, it wasn't an actual loss, which would have been bad. Now they are advertising now satellites in other sports for what they're calling the UFC 251 special. Now they're not giving any details on that, and I would think that if it was a Millie Maker, that they would say Millie Maker. So it's probably going to be some form of lesser pool. Maybe they also offer another TPOC ticket for that. But they are kind of marketing that now for 250, which is going to have 251, which is going to have 3 title fights. So they're kind of looking at that as a super card.
Is 251 a part of Fight Island in July?
I believe it is going to be a Fight Island card. Yeah, Fight Island, for those of you that don't know, Laura Sanko, one of my biggest Twitter MMA crushes, broke the news with Dana White, and they confirmed that Fight Island is in fact in Abu Dhabi, and it is like an island, which apparently has a bridge or a causeway that you can drive over to. So you fly into Abu Dhabi, and it's going to be a self-contained complex. There's going to be obviously they're building an octagon on the beach. There's going to be hotel, restaurants, everything, training facilities for the fighters. And you had asked a good question, Dean, is like, why Abu Dhabi? Well, one of the reasons why the United Arab Emirates is such a big financial district is because of its location. I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but it's so many hours away from a lot of different destinations in Europe and Asia. And it's going to make it a lot easier for international fighters to travel there. If you notice, there hasn't been exactly a plethora of international fighters on the few cards that were held. And there's, a lot of fights have been pushed or postponed due to travel restrictions. A number of fights were rescheduled. Opponents fell out due to visa issues. So this is going to make it a lot easier to actually get these international fighters on cards.
All right, let's take a look as far as what's going on this week. It's my understanding that the little research that I've done, and I'm kind of bummed. I was looking on DK, I was looking on FanDuel, and it's hard to find. It's still early. We're recording this on a Wednesday afternoon. This will go up on Thursday, obviously. I don't have the the odds to finish. I have the odds on the fighters. I don't have the odds who's more likely to finish this fight, which I kind of was hoping for, but I'm sure you can kind of walk us through that. Well, I guess the most important thing that we should say before we kind of dig in and talk about this slate, as is the case, especially these days, who is out, who is in, who got scratched for us as far as the card.
Yeah, so we have had a couple of changes. Marita Agapova, her initial opponent, and this is not even on DraftKings because this fight actually fell off before DraftKings put out their salaries. Now, DraftKings is going to have to add this because this is an actual fight, but Melissa Gatto was going to fight Agapova, who's from Kazakhstan, relocated to Florida about a year ago, trains an American Top Team. Hannah Cyphers, and if that name sounds familiar, 2 slates back, Hannah Cyphers was knee barred by Mackenzie Dern. And she is a very small fighter, very strong, has what the announcers like to refer to as farm strength. She would probably be a 105er if the UFC had a 105 division. Invicta does, the UFC does not. What makes this particularly difficult for her is even though this is a short notice fight, which is bad enough, it's actually taking place at 125. So she's like fighting up technically 2 weight classes, or at least 1 weight class off of where she took her last fight. So she's going to be really undersized here. Agapova's coming over from Invicta where she's had a good streak. I think 2 wins in Invicta, what got her into the UFC. Love the camp, American Top Team, great camp. I think, she is going to wear her out. Cyphers will come out strong. She always does, but that's one change. And then another change we had was Tyson Nam was fighting Ryan Benoit. Ryan Benoit, for reasons that have been undisclosed, have pulled out. We got a former Invicta, current Glory kickboxer who's stepping up on 4 days' notice, fights out of Brooklyn, New York, Adeshev. Interesting, if you look at his page on Tapology, you're only going to see 4 fights. He lost his first fight, took 3 years off, and then got signed on by Bellator to fight in a local card in New York. Now, for those of you that don't know about Bellator and some of the other minor promotions, one of the things they do with undercard fighters is they get them spots based on their ability to sell tickets. So, he probably sold some tickets. He fought on a couple of Bellator New York cards. He's from Brooklyn. Opponents were not exactly the best. So he has a few wins against so-so competition, but he is also a Glory kickboxer, which you're not going to see on his Tapology page. He's got a 16-3 record in kickboxing, which is pretty good. He's been a lifelong martial artist. He is taking this fight on 4 days' notice, and MMA is different from kickboxing. So I'm not really sure. I haven't watched a lot of tape on him yet. I have a feeling he's a wild card, so he's going to be fairly low owned, where Tyson Nam has got a lot of experience. But those are the 2 big, material changes that we've seen as of our recording date.
Is this possibly going to be a situation like we had a couple weeks ago where there was a fighter that was around 7K or so, and he was basically suspected to lose, but then he all of a sudden gave him a guy that he's supposed to crush, and then everybody lock buttoned him. He was like 75%. And Nam, against the previous fighter, the guy who was supposed to fight, I saw the odds on it last night. It hadn't changed just yet, and it was basically a coin toss. So, and now you're saying the guy he's going to fight is essentially a wild card. It's too early. We don't have odds on this fight just yet, but do you suspect that we might see that situation play out here?
Well, it was interesting because you're right. It was a very closely lined fight between Nam and Benoit. And even on DraftKings, it was, 8,200 Benoit, 8,000, Tyson Nam, and that is typically, that is the fight that they feel is a toss-up. That is the salary range for a toss-up fight on DraftKings. So it won't be quite so bad because at least we have an 8K fighter. But depending on what the buzz is, and there's going to be some narrative and some buzz that comes out whenever there's a new fighter, I have to believe Tyson Nam is going to be favored. His ownership is going to spike, which, again, could present some opportunities. He's not so cheap, but still 8K. And if you have what you feel is a lock and load fighter at 8K, he's certainly going to have a high level of ownership.
Is he known for knocking people out or going the distance? What's his history? I'm seeing he's 18-11 according to his DK card.
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience. He tends, again, he's coming off of 2 losses. So he was literally fighting for his job in this fight. And he was fighting for his job here. He seems to be more of a stand-up fighter, at least in his 2 losses. They were both decision losses. I mean, again, he does have a lot of experience. He was semi well thought of prior to going into the UFC. He had some good competition. He fought Sergio Pettis and Kai Kara France. Kai Kara France especially, sort of a quasi top 15 type of fighter. So he was fighting for his job here, literally, against Ryan Benoit. So this, hopefully he wins this fight, he keeps his job. But I don't know if I would expect a knockout unless, again, you're taking a fight on 4 days' notice. I don't know if he was training for a kickboxing fight, so I don't know what his cardio is going to be like. I don't know a lot about his camp either, which is a camp I've never heard of out on, I think, on Long Island or in Brooklyn. So there's the travel. There's 4 days' notice. He's got to get to the West Coast. I don't know. I mean, it might be worth a stab just because, he is an accomplished kickboxer and he maybe could catch him with something early. But I would expect an adrenaline dump here and Tyson Nam just to wear him down.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Of course, the fights are going down on Saturday, and I'm sure more information will sprinkle on through as far as the fighter that we were just learning about the existence of. But just to walk back just for a second, Hannah Cyphers, according to ESPN and according to the Google machine, 115 pounds, 5'1", and you're talking about getting up to 125. And you said she fought a couple fights ago. I mean, how often? It's not I don't think that they fight every 3 weeks or 4 weeks. This is a rare occurrence.
Well, they're hurting for fighters. I mean, you've got fighters who are known as fighters who are ready and willing to take any fight. Like Donald Cowboy Cerrone had that mantra where it's like, he has his patented catchphrase, "I know a guy." Like, so anytime was a fight like at or around his weight, he'd put his hand up like, "I know a guy." And obviously the way that the UFC pays is you get show money and you get win money, right? And generally, depending on how your contract is structured, for the most part, your win money is the same as your show money. So if you're on like the basic UFC deal is like 12 and 12, meaning you get 12,000 for showing up and taking the fight, you get another 12,000 for winning, and then there is a potential to get a bonus for, a fight of the night or a knockout of the night. And there's Reebok money, which is their primary sponsor. So yeah, again, if you're already out there, which it seems like Cyphers has been out there, and they are hurting for fighters, they don't want to lose fights off of cards. Fighters are stepping up more. You're seeing people making a lot quicker turnarounds. And that kind of goes to the fact that there was a 3-month drought and there's no there's no paycheck as a fighter that you got to fight to get paid. So a lot of these guys were probably starving for, the 3 months or that there were no fights, and are willing to kind of step up just to get paid.
Talk about this card overall as far as the talent and the skill, because it's my understanding, like, obviously they're pumping out a card every single week. The talent gets watered down, and all of a sudden these events become less special. And of course, it's DFS. We don't really care. We're going to, whoever's fighting, we're interested, and we'll try to figure out who's going to be on. We'll try to get on the right side of it. But as an overall pool of talent, I versus Calvillo specifically, is that a strong main event? Is this a strong card when it comes to talent?
Well, let me answer that. Based on Twitter, no. I mean, UFC does put on 40 plus events a year. So there are people who are diehards like me who literally schedule vacations around hiatuses on the UFC schedule. I mean, there's always like 1 or 2 3-week hiatuses. But you generally expect to see cards, if not every week, every other week, three cards a month. You go through streaks where you have 10 or 11 weeks in a row where you have cards. given that they hadn't put on any events for a couple of months, you would think that there would be a plethora of ready fighters, which to a certain extent there are, but, close off travel restrictions by all the international fighters. And now you're dealing with local fighters. To answer your question, yes, this card has been essed on as a, inferior type of card, Calvillo, doing a main event, Jessica for those of you who aren't diehards. She won her last fight, a decision, was a decent performance. But before that, she was literally knocked unconscious by the Shevchenko, the good Shevchenko, who's the champion at 125 in a title fight by head kick. Was just laid out, didn't know where she was when she woke up. And then you got Cynthia Calvillo, who is good. I mean, this is her first fight at 125. She'd been having some difficulties making 115. Has had a few really bad weight cuts. UFC said you're moving up to 125. She's trained some in Thailand. She's at AKA in Sacramento, which is Daniel Cormier and Khabib's gym when Khabib trains in the US. It's a good gym. She obviously has some good sparring partners. Her striking looked really much improved in her last fight. I think this is an interesting main event. I mean, look, I happen to like women's fights, so I'm okay with the fact that there are 3 women's fights on this slate. But in comparison to prior week's cards, it is inferior and somewhat watered down.
Okay, so my understanding again is that the 5-round fight is where people that's where you make a big decision, a bold decision. One of your first decisions to make when filling out your DK lineup is how do I handle the 5-round fight? And the interesting thing here is that Vegas is telling us that versus Calvillo is a flat-out coin toss. Not only telling us that, but if I'm pulling up the FanDuel Sportsbook right now, they're saying over/under as far as the total rounds, 4.5 rounds. So basically they're saying, is it going to go the distance? Is it not going to go the distance? Over is minus 235. So they're telling us, A, we have no idea who's going to win, and B, it's going to go the distance. Knockouts are great in the first round, but we saw last week, Nunes went all 5 rounds, but she was super active. Therefore, she racked up a bunch of points. She didn't have to knock out her opponent in the first 5 rounds and land on the optimal. So is this going to go the distance? And are they going to be active enough for me to say I need a piece of this fight?
Wow. It's not going to be a repeat of Nunes Spencer. These ladies are more evenly matched. Generally not super high output strikers. Cynthia Calvillo does have a wrestling and submission game where if she looks to take the fight to the ground, she may have a hard time initially holding down because is a pretty strong fighter. But Calvillo has won fights by submission. It might be worth taking again once these props drop, like Calvillo by submission. Now, there is also a couple of things that you said when you're looking at the main event. There is some line value here on Calvillo on DraftKings. I mean, this is essentially a pick'em fight. May go plus or minus one way or the other over the course of the week. But she's 7.9K on DraftKings, which is a small amount of line value for a pick'em fight. I do think that you'll get 10x out of her if she wins the fight. And it goes to the decision. I'm not sure if you'll get 10x out of Jessica if it goes the distance, because I don't see her necessarily having a takedown game. It's going to be all pretty much striking, and she generally does not score that well if you look at her history. And the other thing people look at is, do I stack or do I not stack in cash, for the main event, given that it's 5 rounds and there is, in theory, at least an opportunity for additional points to be scored. I say you absolutely do not stack in cash. If this goes the distance, you're probably not going to get your value that you're looking for in a cash stack. So I don't see this as stackable in cash. And I really do think that, the line value all goes to Calvillo.
Yeah, so the general thought process here as far as the main event is as these events come and go, and as slates come and go, this one seems more likely than most where you feel safer to fade this main event.
I will have shares, and I think you can certainly have shares of certainly fade the main event and not have shares of it. I certainly see that as this as being a slate to support that.
All right, me being a total donkey, the first thing I look at is the odds, and I'm seeing this Gulia Avea versus Gina Mazzini. Gulia Avea is minus 500, massive favorite. And as far as the DK price on her, I believe she's the most expensive. Yeah, 9.3K. And as you work our way down, there's another one that's like minus 360, a couple in the 200s or so, and then we start getting into the minus 190s and change. How much do we need this Gulia Avea? Is she going to knock out her opponent?
Love me the Raging Panda. That is her nickname, the Raging Panda. She's from Oklahoma. She's got a really strong wrestling base. I mean, that's what she does. In her initial UFC fight, she did okay. I mean, she put up 70.5 points in a decision win. Wasn't great, but she was 8.6K, so you didn't get 10X. Pani Kinzad, though, I think is a better fighter than who she's going up against here. Mazzini, I think Pani Kinzad, who she fought, was a finalist in the Tough House, in the season where they were looking for 145ers. So she fought Gulia Avea. It was a decent fight. Avea dominated her on the ground. She's kind of a wild striker, but has a really good takedown game. Look, there is some risk here. If Mazzini manages to go the distance, there will likely be some grappling points here. And again, I do feel that the Raging Panda can improve off of her last performance against Pani Kinzad. I do like her here. I don't know if I would advocate having her as the highest owned fighter on the card because there is definitely some risk here. And while a finish can happen, and I'm not sure what the over-under lines are yet on this fight, I do think it'll come by ground. And that could either be ground and pound or submission because Gulia Avea is strong. I mean, she's got this Oklahoma wrestling background, and I do think she has a day job, but apparently there's some level of flexibility there to let her train. So I'm looking forward to this. I scouted this female fighter back to her Invicta days and thought she was super impressive. And, you just don't see a lot of female wrestlers, and those that do tend to stand out, like Tatiana Suarez, who is perhaps a future champ at 115 if she could, kind of get over her injury bug. I like her here. I would preach some caution because, again, at 8.6K, she didn't get to 10X. I think the opponent's a little easier here, but she's also at 9.4K. So you pretty much need a finish or a real dominant decision to get 10X in a 3-round fight.
Oh, if you're shopping around, just as far as the Vegas odds, this is kind of interesting. Avea is minus 500 on DK, and she's minus 650 on FanDuel. It seems like a big difference, no?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you get up to that number, it really does fluctuate. Unlike betting other sports where the spreads are more compacted, between, where you're betting on, the favorite for, obviously there are points too that come into play that effectuate the line movements, but, it doesn't surprise me, minus 500, minus 600. It could honestly mean that there were a few more bets taken on FanDuel on Avea that caused the line to move, 100 points. It's just hard to bet. Like, there are a lot of people who will not bet female fighters at this number. Although we did see, and it was very well publicized if you watched last week's slate, there was a bettor who put $1 million on Amanda Nunes.
Did see that.
To win $166,000, which in hindsight looks like the easiest money that you could ever make. But there are, and maybe that's one of the rare exceptions of a fighter you are comfortable in betting, at that kind of number, at that minus 500 number. But for someone who's relatively inexperienced and only has one fight in the UFC, and you see that minus 500, minus 600 number, that's kind of tough.
For what it's worth here, the over-under prop as far as the fight we're talking about, the Avea fight, under 2.5 rounds, minus 136 on FanDuel.
Yep.
And why is that? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, Dean.
No worries. I was going to ask, why you talked about the idea of some people just have a general rule, like they just don't like to lay a big number on women's fights.
I mean, because they generally do tend to go to decisions, and decisions result in the opportunity for judges to be inaccurate, is the way I'm going to put it kindly. Inaccuracy in judging, so, you really, if you're betting that kind of money, you really want to see a finisher. And you just don't get nearly the same number of finishes. And whenever you leave it in the hands of the judges, there's also that risk that now they see it wrong, they get it wrong. And also the other point I was going to make, the fighter right underneath of Avea in DraftKings is going to get a lot of ownership. I mean, he is DraftKings gold. He is the the Khabib of the 135 weight class in terms of scoring and wrestling. So that is probably going to be your highest owned fighter is the fighter at 9.2K, Morib Dishvali.
Yeah, I left that name for you. I was going to say he's fighting Ray Borg. That I can tell you.
Yeah. He trains with Aljamain Sterling, the Ray Longo Sarah camp out in Long Island, a cardio machine, a chain wrestler. I'm not, it's no hyperbole with me saying that this guy is DraftKings gold. I mean, if you look at, he scored 130.5 points at 8.4K in his last fight, scored 91.5 points at 8.6K, scored 98 points at 9.2K, and in a loss at 7.5K, he scored 70.5. He almost got you 10X in a loss.
He's super active.
And he's a takedown machine. He's got cardio. Like, he will be as fresh in the third round as he is in the first. As a matter of fact, like Ray Longo in an interview, his coach was saying that sometimes they tell him that it's going to be a 5-round fight, even though it's a 3-round fight, because
he doesn't know.
Yeah, they want him to pace himself.
Yeah,
you know, like, so they'll tell him, like, in training, oh, you got to train for a fight. You know, they want to get him out of the gym. I mean, you know, like, having him train is not a big issue. It's like they're worried about him overtraining in some cases. So yeah, he's going to get the highest ownership is Morab Dishvali.
Big spending cash. You prefer him over Avea?
Ooh, in cash, I cash GPPs. I just think he's got the highest ceiling and he's got the highest floor. It's unusual where you see a fighter that's got both a high ceiling and a high floor. I mean, if his floor is 70 points in a loss against Ricky Simone, Ricky Simone actually just beat Ray Borg. And it was not as close as the fight looked. He took down Ray Borg at will. Dishvali was winning that fight and actually won that fight. It was very controversial. I was at that fight in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And Dashvili finished the fight on the bottom. And the referee said that he passed out from a choke. So actually, after the fight was over, the referee said, no, you're out. You got choked out before the bell. A lot of people thought that was crazy, that he actually won the fight. But Simone kind of choked him out. But it was a fight that Dashvili was winning the entire fight. And that's the fight he scored 70 points in a loss. So given his floor and given his ceiling, I have to say, and $200 in price savings, I think Dishvali is going to be, almost the free square that people use in both cash and GPPs, which means in cash, everybody's going to have him. So the rest of your lineup better be tight because you're just essentially crossing this guy off.
Yeah, I'm sort of messing around building a lineup right now on the fly, and I'm wondering if I can double down and play them both.
You can.
Or that squeeze things too much. And we talked about Tyson Nam most likely being a favorite as well, too, at 8K. And then if I put those three in, if I put Nam and I guess Mira, we'll say his first name, Avea, we have 7.8 and change for the next three. Is that something that we can make work? Or
yeah, so I would give you, I would tell you to look at Derek Minor. Okay, so Derek Minor is at 7.3K. He is a late notice replacement. He's fighting Jordan Griffin. He's from Nebraska. What's interesting about Derek Minor is he's got a lot of fights under his belt. I think he owns a gym in Nebraska. But what's interesting about Derek Minor and Jordan Griffin is they fought before in another promotion. I think it was LFA. And Minor was actually winning that fight, quite clearly winning that fight, and either had a cardio dump or put himself in a really bad position on the ground and got armbarred by Jordan Griffin in a fight that he was winning. So here he is, at 7.3K, fighting a guy that he should have some level of confidence in, that he was actually winning until he wasn't, against this guy. So I think it's a GPP play. I think it's got high risk. I mean, we don't know what kind of shape he's in. He is taking this fight on somewhat short notice. But he is fighting a guy that he's had success against in the past. So at 7.3K, if you're looking for someone to fill in, probably not the worst guy in the world to use.
By the way, I pulled up the odds as far as Borg versus Mirab in the round props. Under 2.5 rounds is plus 250. And I guess generally that's not good because you want a guy that's going to finish early. But you're talking about Mirab so active that almost doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter in this case because he's a chain wrestler. And what a chain wrestler is a guy that is maybe not the best at holding fighters down when he takes them down, but he's really good at taking them down again. So chain one right after the other. And that's what Merab does very well. His hold down game is not great. And then you combine that with Borg's porous takedown defense. I think he's got a 30% takedown defense. And the guy that he fought who took him down easy, Ricky Simone, was being beaten by Merab, in a prior fight. And Merab had a lot of success against Simone. I'd be really shocked if Borg was able to prevent takedowns. Now, the one caveat is Borg's hands looked really good, better than I've ever seen them in his fight against Ricky Simone, which is why that fight was maybe closer, was closer than it really was, because his hands look good. He could certainly catch Merab with something. Merab comes in and he makes a mistake going for an entry on a takedown, and Borg just catches him. I could certainly see that happening, so it's not without risk. But, yeah, this is a fight that you're actually okay with it going the distance. I mean, you're literally going to be counting takedowns. And each takedown is 5 points. So you're going to go 5, 10, 15, 20. He gets 12 takedowns. That's 60 points. He gets the win for the decision. That's another 30. So now you're at 90. Plus whatever significant strikes she throws, if he gets any reversals, any advances of position, that's how he scored 130.5 last time out.
Give me the fight. You're not necessarily sure who you think's going to win, but you think there's a pretty strong chance whoever does win lands on the optimal.
Ooh, that's a good question. Wow. I don't know if there is that glaring a fight like that. You've got a fight that's kind of an interesting fight and a compelling fight against. You've got Andre Touchy-Feely, just because I know you like nicknames.
What?
Andre Touchy-Feely. That is this fighter's nickname. He's Andre Feely, but he's known as Andre Touchy-Feely. And he is fighting Charles Jourdain. Now he's got a lot more experience than Charles Jourdain, but Charles Jourdain is coming back from being a massive underdog in a fight in Korea against a fighter named Choi, who's known as the Korean Superboy. Had a fight of the year against Cub Swanson, this Korean Superboy, and he came back and actually finished the Korean Superboy and put up 122 points. So he's a prolific striker. Where Andre Touchy-Feely is a good fighter, trains at Team Alpha Male. That's Uriah Faber's gym. I think a lot of people are looking forward to this fight. On paper, it looks like a really good GPP fight. I'd be surprised, honestly, if it went the distance. Both guys, Feely lost a close decision in his last fight. He actually had some moments against Sadiq Youssef, who's a really good fighter. But prior to that, he KO'd the fighter in the first round. He has the ability to finish. He's got a decent ground game. I could certainly see the winner of this fight potentially being on the optimal. And I do see it as kind of a GPP fight because, Jourdain has got to have confidence coming off of that big win in Korea. He's a 6.8K priced fighter, and he's put up 122 points. That's, my friends, what we refer to as a slate breaker. When a guy at 6.8K puts up 120 points, that is a slate breaker.
Must have. You have to have him.
Yeah, that is the guy you need on your lineup if you're going to win anything on that slate. So he's coming in. He's an underdog against Feely. There is some love for him. There are some people in some of the early pods that I've been following that actually like Jourdain. And Feely's got a lot of support. I mean, he's got a lot of experience. He's improving. He fights at a good camp. So I would think that, one, that's going to be a great fight to watch. But two, I could certainly see, based on how these guys fight, that the winner is probably going to be on the optimal. But again, there's nothing quite so obvious as there was last week.
Yeah, Feely, by the way, for what it's worth, minus 230 currently. And this is interesting. If you think it's going to end early or in the distance, under 2.5 rounds, plus 150. So
yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good play. I mean, I think these guys are both going to come out and bang. Jourdain is a striker. Again, I don't see anything glaring. I think maybe Borg, even though it's going to go a decision, I think if Borg somehow gets a win at his price point, he could probably be on the optimal, and Touchy-Feely, is Mr. Optimal. So I think that's probably a better fight. It's just the odds are really wide on that fight. The odds are a little bit narrower on this fight. So if you're willing to make a stand, you could get some decent value. Minus 150 plus 150 under 2.5 rounds. It's not bad. I would probably take a shot with that.
Let's go the other way. Is there any fight you're looking at that's probably going to be a snooze fest? It's going to go with 3 rounds and they're going to be hugging.
Yeah. Aguilar, Charles Rosa. It's interesting because, Aguilar, Rosa's game is jiu-jitsu, but he's one of those jiu-jitsu fighters that's not a great offensive wrestler. So he's good once it gets to the ground, but he's not so good at taking it to the ground. Aguilar is a striker with a really good takedown defense. I mean, he fought another really good chain wrestler named Enrique Barzola and exhibited great takedown defense. Now he lost striking in his last fight, but it wasn't a function of his takedown defense. So Rosa, being a bad offensive wrestler, knowing that it's a fight that he needs to win on the ground in all likelihood, I could see this as a really low-scoring decision for Aguilar. I mean, I think there's some small value in betting him because stylistically, this is a bad matchup for Charles Rosa, who, again, is making a pretty quick turnaround off of a guy that dominated him in Bryce Mitchell in the last fight. And Bryce Mitchell dominated him on the ground, which was supposed to be Charles Rosa's domain. And I think Rosa only put up a handful of points in a 3-round decision where he got dominated. And again, this is a really bad stylistic matchup for him. He's going up against a striker with a really good takedown defense. So I could certainly see this as a very low-scoring fight.
Are we starting to see fighters for the second time now fighting without an audience? And I know we talked about this in a previous podcast. Is there anything we can learn from like a one-fight sample, or it's just guesswork?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some fighters will tell you they like not having the crowd. Others will tell you they miss the crowd. Some will tell you they like being able to hear their corners. Others will tell you it's a distraction. Like, the thought by Daniel Cormier was that it ended up being a distraction for Anthony Smith, that his corner was constantly shouting instructions throughout the entire fight, and that it maybe made it difficult for Anthony Smith. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, he's not going to throw his corner under the bus, but so it's really hard to say. I mean, if you're a fighter that has a lot of anxiety, and there are some, believe me, this might lessen the anxiety. There not being such a big crowd in the audience, and you can kind of go in and do your business. It's a lot like your training or your sparring. So I could certainly see that. I just don't know if there's enough of a sample size to draw any concrete conclusions.
As of Wednesday afternoon, is there a fight you're going to be heavily overweight as far as the projected ownership?
Well, I should say. I would say Dishvali, but I think he's going to be pretty highly owned. I might have a little bit more Calvillo than ownership. Ownership might be split on that, although there is some line value in Calvillo, which I like. There's a wild card. I'm not sure what he's going to be owned at, but Ivy is fighting. He's at 9K. He was going to step in and fight Gerald Meerschaert last week when Ian Heinish's cornerman was tested positive for COVID. And then they did a second test and determined it was a false positive. So Ivy didn't need to step in. The original opponent, Ian Heinisch, excuse me, ended up fighting Meerschaert. So Ivy is kind of stepping in, and he was at least somewhat preparing for a fight last week. I think he's much better than the guy that's stepping in to fight him, which is a guy named Aguilar or Aguilera. Aguilera actually is an okay fighter. Kind of a journeyman. Don't think the UFC, him making the UFC was during normal times a likelihood. I think Ivy has got a distinct advantage in this fight, especially if he looks to take it to the ground. Again, it's his first UFC fight, so there's a lot of risk to a debuting fighter. I do think, though, that he's better than Aguilera. I may have a little bit of more ownership on him because he's a sneaky play. He is 9-point K for a debuting fighter. Generally those set up all types of warning flags, but it could make him lower owned, which provides some opportunity on a card that's really looking to be a low-scoring card.
Give me a fighter you're really, really squeamish to play in cash, low floor, but you think is really appealing from a tournament perspective. Who's popping for you?
Yeah. If Marvin Vettori, Carl Roberson. Okay, so Vettori's a favorite at 8.6K. There's been some bad blood. I'm sorry, 8.8K. There's been some bad blood between him and Roberson. Roberson, I guess, didn't make weight. Wasn't medically cleared to fight. They were supposed to fight a few slates ago. There was a confrontation in the hotel lobby where Vettori got all into Carl Roberson's face. This is a fight that if it ends inside the distance by either fighter, either Roberson or Vettori, it could end up being a pretty decent scoring fight. I don't know if you have the over-unders open yet on this fight, but if it goes the distance, it's probably going to be difficult for Vettori to get his 8.8K. Now, he does have a decent takedown game, but he just doesn't really show, having high scores. Now, this is the guy who fought Israel Adesanya, the middleweight championship, in his first fight and made the fight really competitive. But you just don't see a super lot of high scores. I mean, in his last, he won a decision at 9.5K against Sanchez in his last fight and scored 72.5 points. Prior to that, he won a decision against Ferrara and at 8.6K and scored 85 points, which is almost 10x. But, in a loss, he scored 36. He had a draw. He had a win at 9.1K where he only scored 88.5. As a matter of fact, he's only scored 101 time, and that was in his first fight. So if he can get the finish, and there are some advantages for him in this fight against Carl Roberson, he could be a good GPP play, as could Roberson if he gets the finish. I mean, he's really a flyer because he's priced really attractively on DraftKings, and he is a kickboxer that's got decent hands. So if he could win, if he could put Vettori away somehow, he could be a GPP punt. But I don't know that I like this in cash given the price point and given the history of Vettori not reaching 10x.
For what it's worth, the FanDuel Sportsbook, Vettori minus 230, Roberson plus 184. The round prop over 2.5 rounds minus 220, under 2.5 rounds plus 170.
So there you go. People think it's going to be over. People think it's going to go over, which on paper might make it more of a cash play. But if you're looking at an 8.8K fighter that hasn't reached 10x, since flip phones, we're going to have to actually maybe pass on cash.
All right, tournament perspective, your favorite, I use that term loosely, your favorite fighter, let's say 7-4 and under.
7-4 and under, making it tough. Okay, so let's look at 7-4 and under. I mean, I'm probably going to have to say, and again, realize that we're looking at a high level of risk and variance here. Minor, I think, again, because he's had success against Griffin in the past, because he was actually beating him until he wasn't in the past at 7.3K. That number should be a little tighter. And then Ray Borg. I mean, here's a guy that fought Demetrius Johnson and looked good. I mean, he could, based on how improved his hands have looked, he could catch Dishvali. He's the ultimate GPP punt. At 7K, I mean, you just generally don't see Borg, this cheap. He's still young. His hands have looked really good in his last fight. And if he catches Dishvali with something, he's definitely going to hit 10x. You're definitely going to get your value.
People like to stack the 5-round fights. Is there any value or any thought to stack Borg with the guy? You expect they're going to be active, but only 3 rounds, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that because I actually did that last time Borg fought Simone in a 3-round fight. It didn't end up working for me because Borg only got, I think, 28.5 points. I would have thought that he would have gotten more. There is a risk to that. I mean, if you really don't see anything you like, lower value, and you want to get more of the top tier fighters in your lineup, it's a strategy for cash. It's not without risk, though. I will warn people that it's generally not something that is advised to be done, other than the fact that you just really think that everything in the lower tier is garbage from a DraftKings perspective, and you do want to get several of the upper tier fighters or upper salaried fighters in your lineup. And look, if Ray Borg wins, he's going to be really underowned. That's something to look at as well. I would say it's a risk. I mean, if someone came to me and made a compelling case for doing it because they didn't like any of the fighters under 7.5K, I don't know that I would necessarily talk them out of it. I don't think I'm going to do that this week because I kind of been burned by that strategy once before. But I could certainly see some people doing it. I've seen it in the past.
I feel like we mentioned most every single fighter, either specifically or we kind of touched on them in passing. Feel free, anything we may have missed, any narrative we may have missed, anything you want to reiterate. The floor is yours.
Yeah. So just, you know, Agripova. I mean, Cypher stepping up on short notice, undersized. Again, this is a difficult situation because you do have a debuting fighter in the UFC. You know, I don't know what her salary is going to be yet because she's not in DraftKings. So this is something that, you know, I don't know. I don't know what I'm assuming that Cypher is going to come in and may even be lower than Borg. You know, I'm not sure what the line is yet, how their DraftKings is going to set it when they add it to the salary slate. But Agapova is somebody who I would look at. She's going to have a size advantage. She performed well in Invicta. She's capable of getting a finish. Hannah Cyphers may be too tough for her own good. I mean, she went out and she blitzed Mackenzie Dern, who we all know doesn't have much of a standing or striking game. Is kind of a wild striker. Agapova is a much better striker than Mackenzie Dern. Is a natural 125 or is going to have a huge size and strength advantage. That is a fight to look at once the salaries drop.
Much appreciate your time. Good luck this week. Tell the people where they can find you on the interwebs.
At SunTszu on Twitter, S as in Sam, UNTSZU. And again, you know, going to have one of the winners on Creating Alpha with Brett Apley, who is also a contributor to RotoGrinders. Really excited about that. I mean, I've never interviewed a big winner before. I'm looking forward to it. You know, so tune into that. And look, I'm happy for the opportunity to work with a legend like Dean. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to tell him this off the air because I didn't want his head to get too big. But this guy specifically referenced Dean as one of his long-term idols that he's followed on RotoGrinders. Going back. He said, man, Dean, like you and Dean, like I really love what you guys did together. You got to tell Dean I'm a big fan of his. I've been grinding since 2015. So he is a fan of yours as well.
I'm blushing. Give me his address. I'll send him an 8x10.
I will do that. I think he'll, you know, he might just frame it. You know, so I will handle that off the air. I will send it to you.
He's SunTszu Joe. You can find him at SunTszu on the Twitter machine, Art of War. This was the Morning Grind. I was Dean. Thanks for listening. We're out of here. Holler.
Peace.